Kia ora koutou, welcome to Tupou Talks. In this episode, we're talking about everything water. Everything water here in Lower Hutt and around the region. We've got a great panel lined up this evening, and joining me is Mayor Campbell Barry, Councillor Andy Mitchell, and also aspirant for Greater Wellington Regional Council, Quinton Duffy. Kia ora koutou, and welcome to the show.
Kia ora, Gabriel.
Kia ora.
Yeah, so look, do you just want to introduce yourselves, starting with you, Quinton?
Kia ora, Gabriel, and kia ora, Campbell and Andy. Ko Quinton Duffy tōku ingoa. I live in Paredaho, Belmont, and am a community leader here with a local charitable trust and the Friends of Belmont Regional Park. I'm, as you mentioned, Gabriel, I'm standing for Greater Wellington Regional Council this election. And I had the privilege of serving for a couple of years on the Whaitua Te Whanganui a Tara committee as a community representative, planning the rules and policies for councils to follow in this catchment, so we can move to cleaning up our water and improving the way we manage and care for our water resources over time. So kia ora koutou, and greetings to everyone tuning in.
Kia ora, Quinton, and Andy Mitchell.
Kia ora koutou, ko Andy Mitchell tōku ingoa. I'm currently a Hutt City Councillor. I was elected to council for the first time 3 years ago to represent the Eastern Ward. I live up in Nainai with tributary to the Waifetu stream over my back fence. And like Quinton, I am involved in locally in conservation work in looking after the stream and the forest, and have for a number of years done work with local school children around that too. So the Waifetu is my awa over the back fence and runs all the way down the Eastern Ward, where it joins the Hutt River and into the harbour. So yeah, that's me, and I'm standing for re-election to council this year.
Kia ora, thanks for that, Andy, and also Mayor Campbell Barry. Kei te mihi ki a koe.
Kia ora, Gabriel. Kia ora, Quinton and Andy. Great to be with you today. So I've been the mayor for 3 years. I'm a born and bred Wainuiomata boy, and certainly infrastructure, how we manage and maintain a vital Three Waters network has been a big focus for myself and for the council over the last few years. And I've also been part of different working groups and also some of the conversations nationally around how we get on top of this issue of what is really historic underinvestment across the board, and how do we, how do we make sure that we're looking after what is one of our most, if not the most, precious resource here in Aotearoa, New Zealand.
Kia ora. So, look, let's start talking about the importance of water in our community. Our city, Lower Hutt, is known as Te Awa Kairangi ki Tai, which is the lower end of the river Te Awa Kairangi. So we are a river city. We are, in fact, we have tributaries, wetlands and rivers throughout the whole of this whole Hutt City, every suburb, I think. So there, with that comes, of course, our interactions with water, how our community values water, but also the challenges we face with water, whether that's sea level rises or flood protection. So, Andy, would you like to speak to sort of the value interactions, maybe even some of the challenges, the insights you have from the community with their relationship with water?
Yeah. So I guess as has been mentioned already, water is a natural resource that we all depend on, and perhaps like a lot of other natural resources have been pushing the limits a bit with our water supply. But water means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. It's a taonga. It has a lot of other values as well, recreational value to some people. As you mentioned, Gabriel, water is also a threat to us through sea level rise and flooding. So, it has all of these different values and meanings to different people. And as a council, we're involved, as Campbell said, in 3 aspects of water, really. That's providing fresh, clean healthy drinking water. It's managing stormwater, the rainfall that falls onto our roofs and streets, and getting that efficiently out of the system, and trying to prevent things like flooding and other impacts. And wastewater, which is taking the waste from our homes, from our toilets and sinks, and disposing of that in a responsible manner as well. So those are kind of council's roles in the waters, and those are the three water services that everybody's been talking about due to the proposed reforms from central government.
Is there, from your perspective, Andy, or anyone else, Campbell or Quinton may want to come in here, is there a sort of a recognition or by community of the changes, even with our rivers, even with our dogs and animals? Is there a significant change over the years that's impacted the health of our waterways, or even of our whānau and community?
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to kick off. And, the status of our waterways has changed dramatically, especially since Pākehā settlement. Right from the beginning, people have made their best efforts to control water, which is a bit of a foolish game, perhaps, and doesn't always work out that well. So, many of us will know that the first settlers here in Pitaoni and up into Ellistown were flooded out very rapidly, and that's part of the reason the capital was shifted around the harbour to Wellington. Te Awa Kairangi, as you mentioned, as a natural river, would have meandered and flooded right across the Hutt Valley, across the valley floor from edge to edge, particularly when it was in high waters. So that's changed a lot, and a lot of our streams have been put through culverts and pipes and aren't in a very natural state anymore. That's actually part of the work I'm doing up here in Nainai. We've got concrete culverts pretty much all through our suburb, where previously natural streams have been put through concrete, and the water as a result of that moves a lot faster and a lot more directly than it used to do. So we've channeled it all for that reason, and that's actually kind of backfiring a bit in some of the flooding hazards that we've really created for ourselves.
Kia ora. And of course, Quinton, I mean, you have some insights with the Pariraho Trust, and which is doing a good job with the conservation. Did you want to just share about that up in the Western Ward area?
Yeah, it's my local story here in Belmont and Kelson. What we call Pariraho Forest is a good example of a couple of stream catchments that flow into the Te Awa Kairangi that up until recently were largely unknown. No one would have walked near them. Any pollution, leaking pipes, leaking sewage pipes, paint going down drains, all these things would just be happening unseen. And so the health of those waterways was unknown. And it's through the work of the community group over the last few years, we've sort of built connection of people to the water. So now every day there are local residents going for walks, planting trees, checking traps. At night we take the kids out and go spotlighting for fish and tuna and kaura. And we've started some water monitoring, done environmental DNA testing to see what creatures actually live in the water and what's missing. And we're starting to build up that knowledge, that understanding, that connection of people with water, which is quite a different, and with that comes an appreciation for the values of it, for what it gives to us, and for what we can, our impact on it and what we can be doing much better. And that's quite a big change, I think. That's happening all over the city. Friends of Waifatu Stream, those who clean up Petone Beach regularly, over in Wainuiomata, the planting happening out by the Parangarahu Lakes. There's that community connection to water that's changing our relationship. I think we've commonly seen it as a disposal mechanism for things that come off our roads or out of pipes, or it's just something that does its thing by itself. But actually, we are quietly impacting on all the time. So by connecting with it, by observing, by being more active in the way we interact with water, we can make quite a big difference. And we're seeing that here locally. This summer, we had so many kids swimming in the stream just constantly, every day after school. The swimming hole right next to the school. They'd all be down there jumping in, doing their manu, and it's a new type of relationship to a piece of water that was otherwise ignored until recently.
Now, Campbell, you and I think, actually quite similar in age. So we are young fellas, but even within our short time, we've actually seen. Well, I've seen quite a few changes, even with our rivers here in Wainuiomata and the Hutt. We our contemporaries, I suppose you can put it, would once do bombs and things at the glass pool, but now, of course, you've got to check with Greater Wellington, on their website, just to check is it safe enough to go swimming. So is it going to be a challenge as we come through to summer later this year?
Yeah, I totally agree. And I mean, I'll talk to people regularly about how they used to go, do their trout fishing in the river, and all the recreational enjoyment that used to happen. And that certainly isn't the case anymore. And I do think, particularly in the last 5 years, maybe a little bit more, there has been a real realization of that and how we can start to turn things around. And as Andy and Quinton have touched on, the amount of community awareness and organising to help make a difference has significantly increased. What gives me hope, the most hope actually, is when I go to schools. So I'm really fortunate to get to visit. I think I've visited most schools in the Hutt over the last 3 years. And you can see that this is our natural environment, how we look after our environment, how we leave the lightest footprint is a real focus for our young people, and that is exciting in my view. We just have to step up to the plate and ensure that it's not too late when the next generation take over, because I'm confident that with where their values are and where their priorities are, they will have that right. But we've just got to obviously start taking steps now. And allow that path to become clearer as much as possible.
And now, looking at how do we protect our rivers into the future, and we come to a concept known as Te Mana o Te Wai. I had the privilege of serving alongside, of course, you, Quinton, on the Whaitua Te Whanganui-a-Tara Committee, which simply is, or was, an advisory body committee made up of both elected and community representatives. And this group forum came under the scope of Greater Wellington Regional Council. And the purpose of the group was, of course, to look at the freshwater policy and look at some of those key implementation ideas or strategies. Did you just want to talk about, Quinton, our journey on the Whaitua Committee?
Yeah, kia ora, Gabriel. It was a big journey, so I won't talk about it too much because we learnt a lot. We really did learn a lot. There's a lot of water in our city and around the catchment, and it's not just the streams and the river flowing past us. We actually live on top of water. The aquifer underneath us is a sort of a piece of hidden infrastructure, natural infrastructure, that without it we would have no drinking water in our taps. We draw so heavily on that water that is collected there, has been cleaned through the gravels, and then of course it all ends up discharging into the harbour, being the other piece of our water that surrounds our city. So Te Mana o Te Wai, yeah, it's well, first of all, I'd just like to acknowledge the mana whenua of these waters. So Te Atiawa Taranaki Whānui and Ngāti Toa Rangatira, who played an absolute pivotal and leadership role on the Whaitua Committee. And often when we were struggling to find ways forward, it was often the group of those representatives that would pull a concept out of Te Ao Māori that just clearly laid out that this is actually the best policy path for improving the health of our water, or the situation for all of us, for all citizens of Te Awa Karangi, of the catchment. I think two key concepts most important for me. So one is, traditionally we've thought about looking after water in terms of managing water, that we are here to manage water, And we think about that in terms of flood protection. For example, we're trying to get it to go around us and not in through our homes. And one of the key concepts in the whai tour was actually our job isn't to manage water. Water is, and has always been, it was there before us. We're actually managing ourselves and our impact on the water. We have placed our houses in the way of the water. It is our pipes that are leaking into the water and polluting things. The management is actually about managing ourselves and our own impact and interactions. And that it's quite a very simple concept, but when we turn it around like that, it opens up new doors and new opportunities that actually we can make a big difference here. The other concept is that we utterly depend on water. If we take water from our equation all of a sudden, we cease to have a city. We cease to have a functioning society. We are completely dependent on our fresh water being clean and healthy for drinking purposes and all the other uses we have. We are completely dependent on water for taking floodwaters away to the harbour, and we are dependent on water for our wastewater system. Functions on a water-based wastewater system. So it's not that the water depends on us caring for it. Actually, the water is there to care for us. And so if we manage our impacts on it and we look after it, we look after water, and we respect the mana of that water, then it will provide for us. So those are a couple of key concepts that were so important for me in the whai tour, that the mana o te wai is actually in the end about the mana o te tangata. It's the mana of all of us in the end, is enhanced, is restored, is sustained if we look after and respect the wai itself.
Absolutely. Thanks for sharing your insights there, Quintin. Look, I really enjoyed the experience. I think we started this work back in 2019, I think. So, and that was completed, I think, late last year. So it's been going on for a few years. And look, just to those watching, we won't go through all the details, but you can find these fantastic documents. I can't show it on screen, but you can find it online at Greater Wellington Regional Council, the Whai Tour Implementation Program, and Te Mahere Wai o Te Kāhui Taiao. Now, Quintin picked up on the role of mana whenua. The local iwi or the local tribes, Māori tribes, who have an interest in terms of the treaty as the forebearers, the chiefs signed that with the Crown in matters of our natural resources. And their pure motivation, of course, is the concept of kaitiakitanga, or the caretaking to ensure that our rivers, our mountains and our land survives for generations to come. So these are values that are shared by everyone, and mana whenua have said themselves that this is for all involved, for all of our community, which is why we had that whai tour process. I'm now going to move to you, Mayor Barry. You are involved in a number of hats. I might just ask you to clarify, because I understand you're involved with Wellington Water as well. So if you can just explain what their role is, and perhaps what your insights are in your role in that water space, and then we can talk about Three Waters as well. Thanks, Campbell.
Yeah, so I'm the chair of the Wellington Water Committee. Basically, the committee is formed of members from the shareholder councils and iwi. Mana whenua representation, though, just to acknowledge not all mana whenua are on there, because we have just some issues working through the South Wairarapa. So that's still a work in progress and has been a little bit of a bolt-on, to be fair. So basically, that's an oversight committee of Wellington Water. It looks at issues on a regional basis, while still the ultimate accountability sits with the individual shareholder councils, which of course are Lower Hutt, Upper Hutt, Wellington City, Porirua, Greater Wellington Regional Council as the bulk water suppliers, and the South Wairarapa District Council. A little bit unusual to have Greater Wellington in that role as a bulk water supplier. It's actually, I think it's the only regional council who has that role across the country. So that adds another interesting sort of dynamic to things. So the big challenge, of course, which we face in the region is the state of our infrastructure, how we're going to be able to afford to pay for the upgrades that are necessary. But not only the upgrades, but also the growth which we're experiencing in the region, and Lower Hutt is no exception to that. We reached 2013 population prediction or expectations 10 years early in 2020, when we reached over 110,000 people. I believe we're over 114,000 people now. We're in a very different environment to where we were, say, 10, 15, 20 years ago, with more people choosing to live in our city and in our region. So all of those things are pretty important to consider when we think about what the future looks like. My reflection as a member of Wellington Water and as a councillor and mayor is that the financial toolbox that councils have to be able to fund long-term infrastructure decisions is really bad. It's really poor generally. In an ideal world, I think that toolbox would be renewed and relooked at through the Future of Local Government review prior to any other reform, whether that be RMA or water reform. But we are where we are particularly because of Havelock North and a situation there where 36 odd people got hospitalised and 4 people died due to basically E. coli in the water. So I think it's been an interesting conversation around Three Water reform. I think there's been a lot of unfortunate politicisation of the issue, when actually most people just want to be able to turn on their tap, have clean drinking water. They want to be able to, when they flush their toilet, don't expect it to show up on Cuba Street in Petone. They also want to be reassured that when we have downpours and we have increasing weather events, that water is managed in a way that doesn't flood their property or cause other issues. So for it to be so politicised has been really unfortunate in my view, and a lot of misinformation, intentional disinformation in the debate. My view is the status quo simply is unsustainable. The status quo means one of two things: either rates need to go up significantly more than what they currently are, or our infrastructure gets worse. I mean, that to me are sort of your two options if anyone who's wanting the status quo. So it is a financial problem, but also it is a capacity issue. And I look at councils in the wider country, and we want water to be working for everyone. There's just no way that their ratepayer base is going to be able to afford the upgrades that are absolutely necessary as well. So that kind of summarises, I think, the issue. I think there are some problems with what the government's proposed around local voice, local accountability. I've been saying that since day one. In any large entity or bureaucratic structure, there is a real risk that it's disconnected from what's needed and what's happening on the ground. And the advantage of having your council being there is being able to have that ability to be agile and respond to needs. I think about development opportunities in the city. If someone comes and says they want to bring 1,000 jobs, that we need to do an upgrade to a let's say to the water network in some way, will you have to combat other councils to be able to attract that or to get that investment that you may need in your centre of your city or wherever that may be? So some real challenges that need to be worked through, but the status quo, in my view, simply isn't an option. It hasn't served us well. The sooner politicians are taken away from the decision-making table on long-term infrastructure decisions for Three Waters, the better, in my view. And I think now it's really encouraged people to engage in that select committee process and with government on making these changes as best as possible to solve the problems that we currently face and set us up well for the future.
Oh, well, thanks for that summary, Campbell. So is that with select committee now? People can make submissions through Parliament?
Yeah, I believe they're hearing the submissions. So the submission opportunity may have ceased, but I know there will continue to be engagement on this as well. So there needs to be. Yep.
I just want to pick up there and come back to Quintin and Andy about what you guys are seeing on the ground, in the community, because, I read an article the other day that said 1/3 of our pipe water network, basically our crumbling pipes, need replacing, compared to Auckland, where it's just 10%. And that may come at a cost of something like 800 million. And by the time we get to next year, which is the general election cycle, it'll be $1 billion plus quite easily. I'm driving through Queen Street here in Wainuiomata. The wonderful town upgrade there is delayed slightly because they found that the water main needed replacing. People are complaining all over the hut about leaking pipes, etc. in the streets. Is this what we're seeing on the ground in our communities?
Yeah, you go, Andy, and then I'll add.
Yeah, I was just going to make the real simple point that, like anything else that council provides, like what you see is what you get for what you pay. So we've seen across the region pipes bursting and aging infrastructure because that's what we've paid for up to this date. And I agree with Campbell that at the heart of this Three Waters debate really is an issue of affordability. And one of the things we've seen as councillors is how unaffordable this can all be. Wellington Water provided some advice to our council for our latest long-term plan. They first came to us back in March of 2020, and I remember it quite well because they prepared for our council a few investment options, a high, a mid, and a low investment option that we could pursue in our next long-term plan, our 10-year plan. The high investment option, we never saw it. It was so unaffordable, it was never placed in front of councillors. The mid investment option, with all of council's borrowing capacity, we couldn't afford that one either. So we had to actually ask Wellington Water to go away and revise their mid investment option downwards and increase our borrowing capacity as a council, give ourselves a bigger credit card just to afford a reduced mid option. And that's now, that's 2021, and prices are going up and the problem's getting bigger. So yeah, and that's where it really comes down to affordability. Now the government kind of projected outwards to 2050 and said that without reform, we'd be paying in Lower Hutt $1,000 plus more a year for our water services. And some people have contested the government's maths on that, but as council, we've been advised that kind of the direction of travel is correct if the amounts aren't correct. So it will definitely be more expensive in future without reform. So I guess for me, it really is a question of affordability. And when I think about drinking water, because a lot of people have been raised concerns about asset confiscation or however they want to frame it. When I think about drinking water, I guess what's important to a lot of people is the quality of the water that's coming out of their taps and the affordability of the water coming out of their taps. And that isn't necessarily tied to owning the pipes that they come through. So yeah, people can decide for themselves what's more important to them. But I think for a lot of people, especially over time with these rising costs, it's going to come back to affordability.
Yeah, I just want to pick up on one thing there, Andy. You said, tap water coming out of our taps. Well, first we need water to come out of our taps. And there is angst because we're at the rate where we are consuming, usually I think if I'm right, New Zealand or Kiwi, well, us here in the Wellington region anyway, would usually consume the greater part of our water supply in summer. Now, apparently we're consuming more now in this very moment in winter than we ever have in summer. And so we're at the point where if nothing happens in this space, we're going to have to either, as Campbell said, put up rates or find a costly, expensive solution to source water from elsewhere.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's what you've heard, Quinton, or...
Yeah, and it's not because we're all washing our cars or watering our gardens at the moment. The rain's doing that a very good job of that. It's simply because of leaking pipes, which seem to have increased recently, the accelerated rate of failures. The Three Waters infrastructure, it's a bit of an iceberg issue where we see the odd one in the newspaper when it bursts the surface, But there's a lot that's going on under the ground that we don't see. Leaks are often happening and trickling away and making land unstable and causing sort of slow pollution or other problems underground, and then suddenly it'll burst forth. And so there's one perception I've come across is that it's primarily a Wellington City problem because their pipes are often 100, 150 years old, the old brick pipes and so on that are starting to fail. But I was talking to a local at Rotary recently, and he was involved in the work gangs that installed the wastewater pipes for the new suburb of Kelson about 50 years ago. So this is a relatively recent suburb, and they installed those pipes. And at 50 years old, those asbestos pipes are now actually end of life. And that's why in our stream here, we're actually finding consistent leaks from those pipes of wastewater straight into the stream. That's into a regional park, and then onwards down into the Te Awa Kairangi, past our swimming holes, feeding the algae, and then into the harbour. And so that's a recent suburb. That's pipes that to the eye look okay, but they're actually regularly failing, and they're simply due for an upgrade. And the cost of doing that is, like Andy and Campbell have said, is beyond the scope of ratepayers in Lower Hutt over any sort of time frame where it needs to be done. And that's just to keep things maintained as they are. We want a growing city. We want to provide more housing for our young people, we want to create more opportunities for employment and business. We need to grow. And so we have to actually do more than just fix things to maintain the status quo. We've got to improve things. And
I'm now just going to come to, I think it was it April this year, there was a bit of a survey that went into the community, bit of consultation, and we'll just look at that now. So there was 774 returns, responses. Now, just sort of off the back of this, I mean, you can see 40. When asked whether residents supported the government's proposed reforms, 46% are opposed, 38% are in support, and 16% are neutral. There are some other stats, but I'm just going to pause here for a moment. And is there a response? Someone like to respond to these stats as to why it's almost, well, with the neutrals, it looks like it's almost 50-50. Mayor Barry, you did comment, I read a comment in the paper some time ago that it could be a lack of information or confusion.
Yeah, I think the government did a really poor job on explaining the why. You know, why is this necessary? What is the problem that's trying to be solved here? This, you know, I don't think anyone would want to take on water infrastructure renewals if they probably didn't have to. You know, it's not something that, you know, that probably gets people out of bed in the morning and excited about. It's something that's become necessary, and I think the communication on that front was pretty poor, and there was a bit of an information void. I still don't think that's been recovered from, you know, from the bat. Like, it's very hard to recover from that when it isn't rolled out very well. But yeah, I also, you know, I still think that a lot of people, when you talk to them, they don't really understand what Three Waters means. I mean, it's kind of funny. I talking about just generally Lower Hutt, how we're upgrading our Three Water network, and as soon as people hear the word Three Water, they don't actually realise you're talking about the three different types of water. They think you're talking about the reform. So there's just a lot of confusion out there, and you know, we've put up some information on our website to try and help explain that. But ultimately, it comes to the government that these are government proposals and reforms. They need to do a better job on explaining that to the public.
It's also a policy and development, so it's still evolving and improving. So there is opportunity to constructively try and improve what's proposed. All parties in Parliament are actually proposing Three Waters reforms. They've just got different ways they might approach doing it. And yet Three Water reform has almost become the thing you're either for or against. I rather look at it in terms of we have to reform the way we're doing Three Waters, because the current status quo is economically and environmentally disastrous. It's about how we do it, and no doubt there are improvements that can still be made to the legislation that's going through Parliament, and that's, I think, where a key role for councils is to try and input to make it more accountable to locals, to improve the transparency, and those sorts of things. So it doesn't need to be a black and white for or against. It can be, let's actually make it work for us, for our communities, for our city, and for the environment that is currently bearing the brunt of our degraded infrastructure.
Yeah, I think too it's a really complex issue, but also quite a complicated model that the government have come up with. So I think a lot of people who did that survey probably didn't understand the full extent of it, and what you've seen is some quite deep-seated ideology in some people, and other people who are looking at it from a more pragmatic, maybe from an affordability approach. And I think the 16% in the middle, it said on that graph that they were neutral. I don't know exactly what question they were asked, but I imagine quite a lot of them were brave enough to admit that they didn't actually understand enough or know enough to make a call either way. So, you know, this is an issue that has kind of divided communities, and you can see that in the results there. But what you can also see is that, as you mentioned, Gabriel, it's not, you know, such an obvious split. It's a very contentious issue, of course, and it is a central government decision. So our role as councillors has been to push for the best outcomes for our community from a decision that we don't have to make. Initially, it looked like we might be able to opt out, but that decision was taken away from council. So really for us as a council, it's been about thinking about the detail and how we can ensure things like good local representation and so on.
And also that's right, the government saying that this is happening, this is going ahead. So it's almost like I think those in the water space, i.e. Wellington Water and other entities around the country, are sort of preparing for that policy shift. But Campbell, you actually, I understand, and this is all available on the council website, you actually wrote a letter, I believe, you know, and you made a submission to the government outlining some of the concerns expressed.
Yeah, absolutely.
By yourselves or the community.
Yeah, I think we did a pretty thorough submission, which also shared the survey results, which said this is where our community stands on the questions that we asked them. We just sort of provided that as a matter of fact, and we said, hey, we are supportive of change, as is, I would say, 99% of councils in the country. But we have concerns with these areas, and particularly local accountability, local responsiveness, transparency, those same issues that Quintin and Andy have mentioned as well. So I think our approach has just been we want to get around a table and try and solve this problem, rather than, you know, it all being thrown out, you know, throw the baby out with the bathwater, excuse the use of that pun when we're talking about water, but you know, and then we have to restart again in 5-10 years time, and the whole situation's got worse. So I mean, I find it pretty unacceptable. So I want to find a solution personally, so we can all move forward.
Yes, Andy, go ahead.
I was just going to say, like, I think Campbell's right that this isn't an issue that's popped up overnight either. The more I've kind of looked into the history of it, the more it kind of strikes me as a little bit like climate change. Like, we've seen this coming for a very long time. The Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment looked at it back in 2000 and said that back then that the model was broken, and if we didn't kind of take action to sort it out, it would only cost more and be more difficult in the future. And now we're in the future. We're in 2022 trying to sort it out again. And we really do need to sort it out. We can't just kind of keep kicking this can down. And the other thing I think that that reminds me of climate change is that we also all have personal responsibility in all of this. And, you know, climate change too, all political parties are kind of committed to doing something about it, but they're all disagreeing about how to do that as well. But at the end of the day, we all have personal responsibilities. And with water, it's things like our consumption of water, which in Lower Hutt is pretty high. And I can talk about that a little bit further. But, we need to take personal responsibility. We need our political leaders to take responsibility. And actually, we all need to focus on what the outcome is, which is more sustainable water services.
Absolutely.
And less pollution. So when I take my kids down to have a swim at Taitao Rock, one day we'll be able to do that without the fear of the periodic big flush of wastewater and sewage and poos that comes down when the stormwater system overwhelms the Silver Stream pump station. That sort of thing just shouldn't be happening, but is. And let's look forward to a future where we're not feeding the toxic algae, where we're creating, we're restoring that mana, that swimmability, that the beauty of our Te Awa Kairangi harbour.
Look, I know that Mayor Barry, that you're going to have to go soon and leave when you have to. That's fine. Thank you all for your contribution. Just really want to show the last bit of the survey results is that you've got here the top 3 priorities. Investment decisions are made with transparency. 95%, 85% of respondents say that water service entities should be protected from privatisation, and 70% say it should remain in community ownership. But when you come to these 3 bottom stats, survey results, there are high expectations from our community for safe drinking water, 99%. 99% say that we need to ensure that our resources are available for safety, e.g. firefighting. And 98% of the respondents say storm and wastewater services should be managed to prioritise public safety. So in saying, before we looked at sort of 50-50 support or here or thereabouts, but then there's also a high expectation from our community to maintain our 3 water network. Would that be a fair observation?
I think that's an observation of the point I made earlier. We all want the same outcome here. Everybody agrees that what's important to us and what outcomes we need, but it's just kind of how we go about getting there and paying for it. Ultimately, that's kind of what's at debate currently.
Fantastic. Thank you all for joining us. Our time is up. Last remarks, Quinton?
My last remark would be to throw in that one thing that we as residents and local councils can do that isn't so much a central government water reform type thing is the amount of rubbish and litter that ends up in our waterways. I mean, it's not the biggest environmental problem of all time, but in terms of the beauty of our city, the respect for water and for our community, and then the health of fish in the harbour and that, I mean, it is, when you join community groups to go out and pick up this stuff, it is pretty gross. It's not very hygienic, and it's having an impact. So that's something that actually we can all muck in on. Regional council, city council, community groups, individuals, we can all participate in trying to limit the amount of rubbish that ends up going down our stormwater drains and right through our natural water systems. So that would be my something we can do. We might not be able to influence the legislation directly, but let's get out there and make small steps. Kia ora.
Mayor Barry, of course, you've got to go soon, but a quick last word from you.
Thank you, Gabriel. Thank you for hosting this forum as well, for us to be able to talk about this really important issue. I just, my view is really simple. This is too big and too important to kick down the road. Kick the can down the road on this issue. We have to front up to it. We have to think about how we treasure and how we value our water supplies, how we deal with our infrastructure, and how we embrace doing it in a new way. Te mana te wai, all about the health of our water, all about the health of our environment, ultimately the health of our people. I think that's actually a really exciting future if we can embrace that and look at how we can do things differently and get those environmental outcomes and outcomes for our people and for future generations, those school kids that I talked about earlier.
Kia ora. One quick word from you, Andy.
Yeah, I guess for me, it's, if we all place greater value on water and acknowledge it for the taonga it is, the really critical resource that it is, then the way we kind of act around water and towards water will hopefully change and can help improve things for the future.
Thank you so much for coming on, Campbell, Quinton, and Andy. Everybody up there, look after water, value water, and don't waste water. Kia ora koutou katoa.